Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Product School webinar. Thanks for joining us today. Just in case you didn't know, Product School teaches product management, coding, data analytics, digital marketing, UX design, and product leadership courses online and our 16 campuses worldwide. On top of that, every week we offer some amazing local product management events and host online webinars, live streams, and Ask Me Anything sessions. Head over to productschool.com after this webinar to check them out.
Hi everyone. My name is Katerina Suchkova, but I usually go by Katya. I've been in product management for almost 10 years, working with startups and B2B, as well as some of the bigger companies. So my last few years I spent at ServiceNow, where I was reimagining enterprise products. And in the last year or so, I've been doing a lot of coaching, particularly coaching product managers and designers, as well as training teams and big companies about the value of design thinking. So why don't we start? I'll share my presentation. Here we go. Awesome. So today I want to talk about the fundamental part of being a product manager. It's about prioritization and how can we, product managers, make better decisions so that features or products that we build solve real problems and deliver experiences that make people's lives better. For me, a cornerstone of product management, understanding what to build next and actually what not to, and being able to justify this versus that, and making good decisions really, in my opinion, sets a good product manager from a great one. And when I talk about decisions, I don't necessarily say right or wrong, because in reality, in product management, same as in life, there is no right or wrong decisions. There are good decisions that lead to good outcomes, in our case, good products, and they are good with information that you currently have. So when you get more information, more pieces of data, that decision might not be relevant anymore. It doesn't mean it's a bad decision, it's just not relevant. So you move on, you pivot. But again, it's all about having those better informed, making better informed decisions. So evidence-based decisions make us better product managers. And honestly, who hasn't been there? You look at your backlog and everything seems to be a priority, right? But we know that when everything is priority, nothing really is. And this is where you as a product manager have to make a call, and you have to communicate that decision that you make, and you have to justify how did you come up with that decision, and make sure that your case is really strong so that your decision can withhold the pressures from your management and stakeholders. But hey, there is one thing, the decision fatigue. And that affects us all because we're all human beings, and this is just how we are wired. We cannot fix it really, but what we can do is that we can be aware of some of the flaws in our human behavior and use mental models as well as frameworks that help us make better decisions when we feel like we're tired, when we feel like it's just more convenient and easy to take a easier path. And it also will help us to avoid taking that easy path, that simple shortcut that in the long run actually leads to not good decisions and not good outcomes. And we want to avoid this, a cognitive load, right? When presented with too many choices, too many options, when the stakes feel so high in the product management life, they actually do feel pretty high almost on a daily basis. We tend to take easy paths, the more convenient one. which most of the time just kind of ends up not to be a good one. And given nowadays we make thousand times more different decisions as our caveman ancestors, that we actually have to protect ourselves from making those poor decisions. And here comes the mental models. Oops. Here you go. And here comes the mental models. And as you can see, as the name implies, mental model is something how we understand the world around us. We use mental models to make big, complex systems easier, better for us to understand. We break them down. Mental models were popularized by Charlie Munger, and they are currently widely used by a lot of prominent entrepreneurs and investors, because it's one of the ways to help us understand the world around us, make or create the connections, and again, break down those complexities. A common example of the mental model would be a Pareto law, 80-20, meaning that saying that 80% of your returns or value or outcome usually comes only from 20% of your effort. So using and understanding the model that it exists, you can focus on 20% that actually generate the value and outcomes that you're looking for. In product management, we can, instead of mental models, we can use frameworks. And framework is just this. It's a foundation, it's a skeleton, it's something that software engineers use to help them guide and build things on top of that. And what's good about frameworks is that even though it is foundation, it still can be adjusted, which means that as you are making the decisions, and using a framework, framework is actually not a hard tool, which means that you still use your common sense and you still factor in some of your circumstances. And what actually turns out that the frameworks are pretty much your tools in product management, and the more tools you collect over the time, the better decisions you can make, the higher quality of those decisions. And it turns out that the more variety in your toolbox, the better your decisions eventually are. So what are some of those framework types? Well, before we kind of move on into this chapter of webinar, most of the frameworks I'm about to cover right now, they're not a secret. They're all available. Product managers have been using them for years. There are quite a few that have been created in the last few years to help companies and product teams to make, again, better decisions and help them prioritize, especially when you have a lot of features and a lot of competing features. And again, when you look at the backlog, when everything looks like a priority, use a framework. And given that, none of these frameworks, well, all of these frameworks are available to you, my goal with this webinar is not to go in detail when describing a particular framework, but my goal is really to inform you about them and empower you to use them, to go ahead and research deeper one of the frameworks that you liked, that sounded more applicable to your team, to your organization. Go do research, dive deeper, and do a little test, pilot test it. So we'll start with, oops. All right, so what we're going to do here is that the way I decided to categorize some of these frameworks are, we'll start with two-dimensional. So two-dimensional frameworks are quite simple. You would use them if you really want to move fast and stay lean. Actually, most of the two-dimensional kind of were created or popularized with the lean methodology. You would use them when you don't really have a lot of customer data, but you have a lot of broad or big ideas and concepts. So a typical two-dimensional framework would be value versus effort. And this framework is pretty straightforward. It's a quick tool, but it's very empowering, and it helps you really understand which idea to invest in and which project or idea to drop. Usually you would want to go into the left-hand quadrant, right? It always seems like a low-hanging fruit because you do have a high value, but your effort is pretty low. So why not to start there? But as you will see later, and as I will keep repeating a few times throughout this webinar, is that frameworks are just skeletons. So again, there's no hard rule. So even though something might look like a low-hanging fruit, and it might be, you might think this is a priority number one, there are different factors and circumstances, again, such as the technical debt, that you have to think before you jump on making that decision. Another example is apples versus oranges that was created by Gusto, the HR and payroll company. So the way they approach that is that they look at the grade from the perspective of customer expectation versus customer impact. And again, it's pretty straightforward. They suggest to use this framework when you're trying to compare ideas that are not really relevant. They might not be even solving the same problem, or maybe if they are, they're drastically different. That's why they call them apples versus oranges. For example, you could work on an onboarding feature, or you can build a dashboard. Those are pretty different ways of solving a problem. So you would definitely want to try this framework to figure it out which quadrant each of those ideas fall under. Another category or type is three-dimensional. So you would use the three-dimensional frameworks when you have a little more data from your customers. Let's say user feedback, testing, something from your A/B split test, analytics, anything like that. Also, if you feel like your team just constantly tends to make decisions based on weak signals, 3- or 4-dimensional frameworks are your best tools to get more evidence and also protect yourself as a product leader against opinions, especially opinions from your stakeholders that are not necessarily evidence-based. It also is a great tool to use when your stakes are pretty high and you want to avoid a type of death march type of projects where you make a decision and everyone just works towards them for 6 months, and at the end of the day, it turns out you didn't have enough information, not enough evidence to make that call back then. And in reality, even though I said that two-dimensional help you to move fast and stay lean, all of the frameworks, once you get more experience and understand which to use and which circumstances, they actually help you to move fast as well, because again, you don't have to make decisions just based on your limited knowledge of the world or data. You can bring in more data points and tools to help you make better decisions. So the best, so one of my favorite three-dimensional frameworks is ICE, impact over confidence over ease. Itamir Gilad, a product coach, has a lot of good information both on his blog and Medium, and he put his very valuable tool together that helps you to make good decisions based on the impact, meaning the number of people that your decision or your idea will touch, your confidence. Itamir created a really nice tool to determine your confidence level. And as you can see, the more data than you have from your customers from launch or from market data, the higher your confidence is. So anything regarding vision, strategy, or someone else's opinion really kind of goes into like very low confidence level. And like every other framework, you can use ICE a few times as you prune your backlog. It's really because with the time you can get more or less confidence. Let's say you decide to launch a quick user testing and you get some evidence and your confidence goes up. But at the same time, you can send a survey with a few of your ideas that you're thinking you should invest in, and your data will come back saying that customers actually don't perceive value that you associated before with a specific project. And the last category of the frameworks is multiple dimensions. It's a really good category or frameworks to use when you're joining a new team and you're really trying to understand what exists, what features in backlog, what can we do with them. It also helps you to get many teams involved by running a quick workshop or just getting all of their ideas and doing it yourself. You can also use it at any level of prioritization. And again, when the stakes are high, don't think about it, just go ahead and use it. Another, my favorite for multiple dimensions is the RICE framework. RICE is widely used by Intercom. And again, it has a lot to do with impact, confidence, and your effort. But then they added another dimension, which is reach. And reach is really how many people your idea will touch or will impact. And what I would recommend is don't just look at reach only at your core users. You really want to go and look beyond them into the potential user base, because this is probably a new market that your company is trying to tap in anyway. Another nice multidimensional is a product tree that was created by ProdPad. I personally really like this one, and I like to use it with my team as a really good way to kick off a project or look at the product from the bird's eye view. So here you have the roots, and your roots is really the infrastructure that supports your product. The trunk is a core feature or core features that support your product that already exist in the product. And the branches could be your themes or epics, while leaves are actual features that you and your team can come up or try to prioritize during your workshop as your team is working on this prioritization exercise. And before we kind of move into the real life example on how would you use those, let me just close off this part by saying that frameworks like mental models used over time can help you to make high quality decisions, because at this point you're aware that you are not perfect, that you have a decision fatigue. The cognitive load sometimes is too heavy to make an evidence-based or high-quality decision. It helps you also to make a strong case when you're presenting your roadmap to your teams and your stakeholders, because you brought in some evidence, because you really put some thought into this in making the decisions. And again, given that framework is just that, a framework, a skeleton, it is not a hard rule, so you should use your common sense and perhaps not follow it strictly when it completely doesn't make sense. So with that, let's move into the actual example. There you go. So here's our use case. After many years of non-cooperation, two towns that are located in different countries, several hours apart and separated by a wide and powerful river, finally reached an agreement and decided to open up their borders. Now, the local government is trying, actually like local governments are trying to figure out how to have people freely move from one side of the river to another, from one town to another. Because it never has happened before, there is no infrastructure in place in either town, and there are no solutions exist. And the reason I kind of decided to take this hypothetical example, because it's pretty straightforward. It's easy to understand. Either you are an aspiring product manager or you've been in the field for a few years. You're really going to put us through some of the product mindset. So here we go. You are the product manager on this high visibility, high profile project. And of course, you have your team, you have designers, quality engineers, you have developers, and everyone else to help you create a feasible solution, valuable, that fits the budget and of course meets the deadline. And so what do you do? As the product manager, you kick off the project, you start collecting data. You go talk with residents, you talk with your stakeholders, perhaps your management, you get together with your designers, with your team members, you start brainstorming and getting information. And you start doing everything that you would do in that first exploratory phase of the project. Then you go to the whiteboard and you start forming some ideas that potentially can solve the problem. And in the end, your team comes up with a few solutions, with a few ideas that you think might work best based on some quick testing and perhaps surveying that your team has done to validate some of the hypotheses. And here are some of the ideas that you came up with. So you can build 2 airports in both towns. They will definitely connect 2 sites, and people can freely move from one side to another. You can also build a boat rack and let residents take kayaks or boats to get back and forth really quickly. You can also bring in ferry and build the entire infrastructure to allow for ferry to take passengers, perhaps even cars from one side to another. Or you can build a bridge. So let's start with that first framework. So you go to the whiteboard and you draw value versus effort. You're trying to prioritize. You start with a boat. Well, it looks like it's based on your developers and engineers' feedback. Looks like it's a pretty low effort, but pretty reasonable value. You figure you can get something in a week or 2. Sounds like a low-hanging fruit. Perhaps a good idea to start with. You looked at the building airport, and while the value is not really clear, you understand that the effort is really high because there is no infrastructure, there is nothing that has been built. So everything has to be from ground up. And then while bridge has a pretty high value, it also is associated with high effort. Again, you need to bring the pillars, you need to make sure there is, because it's the underwater bridge, there are a lot of nuances that have to be thought about and built in to make sure that the bridge can withhold all of those features that you want to build on top of that later. And there is a ferry that slightly less of an effort than a bridge, still pretty high value. Looks like a reasonable idea. And then you could also try the gusto. You can look at your customer expectations or your residents of the town expectation versus how will it impact them. And as you can see, kind of looks a little bit similar to the other framework that we just used in terms of where your ideas are falling down. So while airplane or building the airport is totally unexpected, you're potentially going to wow all the residents. You also understand that impact is not really clear here either. Your boat is pretty expected. I think when you ran the survey, a lot of people did express that it would be probably easier just take a boat and go back and forth. And you also understand that it has enough impact or value to proceed with that. And both ferry and bridge kind of fall into this medium type of expectation. Residents are kind of aware, but they don't really know. But it's also a pretty high impact. And so what next we would do is that we're going to go ahead. So before we do that, based on those two frameworks, it might seem to you that, hey, building a boat rack is a winner here. Pretty easy. You can get something up and running in 2 weeks. The trophy goes to the boat rack. Let's do it. But what you can also do as a product manager is that because you've done your research, you've done all that exploratory phase, you actually do have some custom data. And you understand the field, you became a domain expert, you have all that knowledge and experience that collide to also give you a bit of a gut feeling that you need to explore that a little further. So you use the ICE framework. We created this quick table, and you decide to start ranking airport, boat rack, bridge, and ferry. And I'm not going to go deep into details of how I have done it, but I'll quickly highlight that the trophy here actually goes to bridge because you understand that the impact is going to be pretty high because, again, because you've done your research and you have that intuition and you understand that, hey, there is a train track that the other town started building. You understand that at some point there will be a need to connect two towns via train. So probably a bridge, besides also, moving the containers and people and doing all those things that to connect those two countries or two towns easily. Your confidence level is also pretty high. Again, you ran, let's say, a survey or some kind of testing, and it came back with a very positive data. It's not an easy endeavor, though. You understand that you can't really put 10 or 9 for it here, but somewhere at 3 or 4, and let's say we end up at 4. So your overall score is 400, so it's obviously a winner in this case. But you can also try the RICE because again, we have more data. We know how many residents in each town. And assume each town has 100,000 residents in each, because if you remember, I mentioned that you don't want to use RICE and using specifically reach dimension. You don't want to just look into your core users, which means the actual residents, people who live in the towns. You want to look at the potential where perhaps tourists or people from other towns that would start coming over and maybe creating some kind of tourism opportunities here, again, extra revenue. As you can see, bridge also gets the highest score here, though the ferry is not far behind. And so with that, you collected all your data, you created a strong case. Now you have all the evidence to decide that bridge is the idea that we're going to go with. You present your roadmap to your stakeholders, to your teams. You justify decisions based on some of the framework that we just ran. And then you really describe, telling them how you went, like your thinking, how you went from having did it on the low-hanging fruit first, the boat rack, towards bringing in more data to understand, are you really making a good decision? So let's say we decided, so the bridge, right? The roadmap is delivered. Now it's the time to start really brainstorming how we're going to build a bridge and all the parts, all the features that you want to bring in. What are you going to make MVP? Or you just want to start with you want to start with a solid project. And I think in this case, the product tree is the perfect tool. And again, breach is also a great example for you, either you're aspiring product manager or someone who's been doing that for years. It's really easy to understand that infrastructure, when it comes to breach, is all about creating a strong foundation, construction, making sure all the surfaces has corrosion, and then you create all the piling, supporting piers, everything to hold up your breach and make sure that it can withhold the train tracks, the containers, et cetera, et cetera. Your trunk in this case is the actual breach deck. And then the branches here, we have train tracks, because again, you've heard that the other town or country decided they're extending their trains. There is also a pedestrian path. There is, you want to put at least 3 lanes highway because the growth, there are more and more people coming into the both towns, and because perhaps you can bring in more tourism. And then there are leaves, specific features. You decide that, hey, we can do something like, let's put a feature to create an engine jumping deck. It's going to bring in tourism, extra revenue that we can put towards what we spent on the bridge. We're going to also install a tourist deck so that when they come over, they can get a nice 360-degree view, especially during the beautiful sunset. So as you can see, this tool is great for really working on that one big idea and breaking it down. It wouldn't be really convenient to use it to compare those 4 ideas, because it just wouldn't make sense. And with that, before I close the webinar, just want to mention that as you, I hope you were able to see that frameworks are really just the tools for you that are always at your disposal. You can use them at any time when you feel conflicted and when you hear too many weak signals and you understand that you need to dive deeper in order to make strong decisions, those evidence-based decisions that eventually will create a pretty strong case against all types of opinion of a highest paid person and other weak signals that we tend to pay attention more when we don't have evidence. Use that framework in order to find and invest in the winning ideas, and quickly drop those that really not working, no go. And everything in order for us, for product managers, to create better products and, of course, be better at our craft. And not just be good, but be great. And I put a quick slide deck of all of the resources that I used. Again, nothing is secret. Everything is available. I do encourage you, and I want to empower you to go ahead and research more and try one of those frameworks. Again, it doesn't have to be a heavy process. It can be a quick tool that you can try it out on your own and then start introducing it to the rest of the team and hopefully to the rest of the organization if you guys don't use anything. And with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.